So now that we've explored a couple of the basic UI elements, let's make them start doing things. So up till now, if you've made some buttons and clicked them, they probably won't be doing a whole lot. So the way that we get them to do things is by a property called the callback. So a callback is a function handle, so it's a pointer to a specific function, which will do a series of actions for us. Now, if I'll just be making this all inside of a function file because that will help us. So function myGUI to start with. So in myGUI, we have our fig, which will equal a figure, and we'll have a, which is equal to a UI control, b, which is equal to a second UI control, and let's have a third one. So if we save this and then run it, we've got a figure which actually has 3 UI controls at the same position. Now, I'm going to set a different position for each of these. So the properties that I talked about last video, we can set these when we're creating the UI control as well. So just in the same way that we're using get and set, we use the property name as a string and then pass it the value. So this one we might want to have at 150 across, 150 up. And this will be a 60 by 60 button. I'm just going to copy and paste because it will be a little bit quicker. Something like that. So we save that, and I'm just going to put figure 1 there. We'll close our figure, and start it again. Just dock it. We've got our 3 buttons here. So as I said, us clicking them doesn't actually do anything. So I talked about a property before that was called a callback. So if I set a callback, this takes a function handle and it will call that function whenever we click on this button. So I haven't actually made a function to go there yet, so I'm going to make a sub-function called my callback. Now, when we're defining a callback, the way that MATLAB's GUI is set up, we need, as in we must do this, to have at least 2 inputs. Now, traditionally, these 2 inputs are called HObject and event data. And I'll go through what they are in a second. But for now, just make sure if you're making a callback, you must have these 2 inputs for it. So I'm going back into setting what my callback is, and it's going to be my callback. So a function handle is created by using the @ symbol and then what the function name is. You don't pass what the inputs are because the inputs are passed when we click the button. So if we save that, and we'll do this for each of our buttons that we've made, so B and C. We can do that. Now we're clicking our buttons and nothing's happening because our function doesn't actually do anything yet. So if we just do something really simple, we'll display some text, and that's what our handle will actually do. So we've saved that, run it, we click on any of these buttons and it says some text. So now our buttons are actually doing something. But displaying some text in the command window probably isn't really what we want to do. What we might want to do is just to explain what we can, the possibilities of a callback, I'm going to set these buttons so that when we click them, the size of them will change between 50 and 100 pixels. So this is where these two inputs come in. So HObject is going to be the handle for the object that calls this callback. So what that allows us to do is set HObject and then say position to be whatever position we're going to need. But first, just thought that we're going to need to get what the previous position is. So posi is equal to get HObject position. So this will get what the previous position is, and posi at 3 to 4, 3 to 4 is equal to Randy. That is between 50 and 100. So we can do that twice. It's probably a shorter way to do that, but I'm not doing that at the moment. So posi. So what this will do is we'll get the previous position of whatever object called it. We will change what size it is between 50 and 100 pixels, and then we'll set what that position is. So I'll save that, and we'll try running this again. So each time we click this button, it changes size. Now, you'll probably notice that there's another button that's hiding underneath. That's because I've been lazy and I've been closing these figures. So the buttons that are underneath are actually the previous ones, which will all be using these new function handles. So I'll just close that and replay it. It'll probably look a bit cleaner. So each time we click it, the button changes size. Now, you'll notice that because we're using this HObject, it will be changing the object that we're actually clicking. So they're all using the same callback, but because we're using this HObject, we're always going to be changing the one that we want. So that's a very basic example of what callbacks are. Now, this event data isn't used particularly often, but what it is that there's other properties called, I'll just bring this back up. So A, get A. There's another property called keyPress function. So keyPress function is another callback, but what it does is that it will only activate when you press a key. When you have that object selected and you press a key. So I'm going to make another subfunction, which is going to be another callback. So function my key press, and once again it needs HObject and event data. Now you can call these whatever you want, but if you look through help or anything, they use these fairly consistently, so I would recommend calling it those. And what we're going to do is just display event data. Now what we need to do is actually set these, so set A, and it's called key press FCN. So key press FCN, and this one's actually going to be my key press. I'll do this for the other ones as well. So B and C. So down the bottom. Now if we select, so whatever is selected is what the key press is going to be sent to. If we now press a button, I think it's because I haven't run it again. So now when we press a key, we get this structure back, which is the event data. So as you can see, the first key that I pressed was space, the second key that I pressed was A, then an F. So that will tell us whatever key that we press. Now this is useful if you're going to be making something like a video game, where you want to use WASD to move something around, for example. I'm not sure where you might use it for this subject, but keep it in mind that there are other callbacks that work in different cases, and my key press is probably one of the better ones to be using. So now that we know how to use callbacks, let's actually do something that's not just making it a random size. Let's make a little interface that will increment a counter. So we've got 3 UI elements at the moment. That'll be enough for now. Just save what we've got now. I've moved these. I'll just rerun this quickly. So what I'm going to do is this button is going to increment by 1, and this button is going to increment it by -1 or take 1 off. And this button I'm going to change to be a text box, and the string value is going to be whatever the counter is currently at. So what I need to do is make a variable to store my counter. Counter is equal to 1, so it starts at 1. Now, one thing that I haven't said about callbacks is that we can define a callback with more than just these. More than just these 2 inputs. We can have a third or fourth input, or however many that we wanted to. So I'm going to make another one called increment. And just to make this a little bit clearer, I'm going to get rid of our key press stuff that we were working with before. And also get rid of that. So now we've got this third thing called increment, where we've defined our callback to pass it more values than just HObject and event data. We need to play around with a little bit of syntax. So the way that we do this is by using curly braces. So we put everything into a cell, and all the other cell elements are going to be so the first cell element is going to be the function handle. The second cell element onwards is going to be the third input and onwards. So we don't worry about these 2, but for everything else we put it as another cell element. So if I wanted the button B, which is the one that's 10 from the left and 150 from the bottom, so this button, it will be a positive 1, so I'm just going to give it the increment of 1. The button C is going to be an increment of -1, and I don't actually want A to have a callback, so I'm going to change A's style to be I think it's called an edit box. So set a style. This element's going to be deleted actually, so I'm just going to create another one quickly. So A equals UI control. So set a style. So this will just pull out what they are again. It's just edit. So I want this one to be an edit. Instead. And so what happens in my callback is, now because this is a subfunction, and what happens is that when we run this function, it does all these commands and then exits. But because these handles were created inside of this workspace will continue to be active until those handles no longer exist. So what that means is that we can have a variable that's inside of our main function and still have access to it, even though this function has finished running. So what we can do is say that counter is equal to counter plus increment. So that will continue to edit this value even though this function has finished running. So that's just a very nice little feature that MATLAB sort of does automatically for you, but it makes making a lot of these GUIs a lot nicer. So now that we've increased the counter, we actually need to display it as well. And when I create it, I'm going to say that the string is equal to num to string of counter, and whenever we click one of these buttons, we'll also have to update what the string is in there. So set A. So A we've got access to because it's we're in a subfunction. So set A string to be to str of counter. So hopefully, just close this and we run this one again. And I'll just dock it. We're pressing a button, and yeah, it's increasing and decreasing that counter. So that's all using the same callback. Now we haven't used HObject this time because we're not doing anything to these buttons. We're just doing stuff to this text box. So screen's a little bit laggy at the moment, but that's all working nicely. So as I said, we're not using HObject at the moment because we're not changing the objects that we're actually clicking on. We're changing other objects. One final thing of note is that when you're making an actual GUI, you're probably going to have 20, 30 plus of these buttons. Using a structure to store them all is very nice, and usually it's nice to just have a structure called handles, which is equal to a struct, and then everything is handles.a, handles.b, handles.something that helps you remember them. So that's why I went through structures before, because they're very helpful to store all of the handles that you need for your user interface. So in the next video, I'll be going through something a little bit even less trivial than what we're doing at the moment.